We are, I think it's mostly morning for everyone on the call. I know there are a few coming from Europe and Africa. So thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world for this morning session. We have got 90 minutes with a real expert. Nancy Regan has been with us before at Mainstream a number of years ago, and as Lisa mentioned, is keynoting with us again next week in Melbourne over the 2 days. So we're super happy to have Nancy give a session right now. Nancy's a leading authority on reliability-centered maintenance with over 25 years experience of hands-on experience facilitating all kinds of courses, training, and helping huge clients from around the world. She's trusted by global organizations to deliver interactive, informative, and as you'll hear, inspirational presentations. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you. I know that you're going to be asking us questions to keep us going through the next 90 minutes or so as we talk about reliability-centered maintenance and a particular case study I think we're talking about as well, Nancy. So enjoy, yes. Folks, over to you.
Thank you. Can you make it so I can share my screen? And in the meantime, while you're doing that, let me just let me welcome everyone. And feel free, I've got 3 screens, so if you see my head doing this, that's why. But I'm also gonna monitor the chat. And if you, I would like to try to make this a little interactive. If we were in person, you know, you could be shouting out things. But if I ask some questions and you have an answer, please do put it in the chat. And if you have a question, I'll do my best to monitor the chat. And you can also feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away or make a comment. Let's make it as, I personally think reliability-centered maintenance is fun, and I'm gonna try and make it even more fun than it normally is.
Can you do it now, Nancy?
I think so, yes. All right.
Okay, perfect.
Now.
There we go.
Okay. Now, wait a minute, let me see which screen you can see. Do you see my opening slide, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, see your opening slide.
Okay, and now you just saw me switch?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we're good to go. Now I just want to open up the chat again. I lost the chat. Well, let's see. Okay, let me just find that before I get going anymore. Sorry, guys.
No worries, don't worry.
Oh, here we go. Okay, let me see, chat. All right. Here we go. All right, I'm all set up now. Okay. Yes, so welcome everyone. I have had a technical love affair with reliability-centered maintenance for over 26 years now, and I love the process so much because I have seen the overwhelming positive results that can be reaped when the process is applied correctly with the right people. Now, one of the things that I love about reliability-centered maintenance is that it embodies many of the fundamentals of maintenance and reliability. And as human beings, when we can understand things at a very basic level, those things can then become meaningful to us. And it allows us to apply them in our own lives, and in this case, in our professional lives, to more complex situations. But the key here is that we have to actually apply the principles. And it's no mistake that I use the word we, because I fell into one of maintenance and reliability's deadliest traps. I didn't walk my own talk. And for that, I suffered the consequences. And I'd like to start to share that story with you. And one more thought, I've made a case study out of the experience that I had. And so the examples that we're going to go through today are very basic, and that is by design. So I know that you are responsible for more complex equipment But again, my goal for today, one of my goals is for you to start to understand the basics in a meaningful way. So anyway, here's the story. So picture this. I'm driving in my 2014 Subaru Forester, and I'm driving home from the Reliable Plant Conference. So I'm driving home from just having presented on reliability-centered maintenance and how one should be proactive. And I get about 3/4 of the way home, and all of a sudden my low engine oil light comes on. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm driving and I don't know, a light comes on, or there's something out of the ordinary, it can be a little jarring. So I see this light come on, and I'm on the highway going 70 miles an hour, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a light, the low engine oil light is on. What's going on? So I quickly whip myself up into RCM mode, and I start thinking about what failure mode, like what specifically could cause that low engine oil light to illuminate. And in my mind, I identify 3 things. And one of the failure effects of one of those failure modes could be pretty extreme. So I knew that I had to pull over on the side of the road. And that's what I did. I pulled over on the side of the road. I'll finish the story in a little while, but I want to state for the record that I could have avoided this whole thing. I was thrown into full-blown reactive mode, 150 miles from my home, and if I had just proactively managed one failure mode, I could have avoided the whole thing, but I didn't. So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm on the side of the road doing what I'm doing, and I felt really embarrassed. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, with what I do for a living, how could I let this happen? But I decided to forget about the embarrassment, and I decided to make lemonade out of my lemons and create a case study for it. And that's how this case study was born. Another thing is, when I was thinking about, I felt embarrassed. How did I let this happen? With most of the people that I talk to in our industry, most people I talk to are living in reactive mode, running from fire to fire, which is what I was doing. I was living in reactive mode on the side of the road. And so if we were live, I would ask you to raise your hand, but would you put in the chat if maybe you're in reactive mode in your organization, or you know of organizations that are living that way, maybe not 100%, but at least somewhat, where they're not totally proactive. Maybe you can just put that in the chat so I know I'm not alone. Misery loves company, right? Oh yes, Ruin, thank you, absolutely. And I hear that a lot. So the other thing I want to say is a mixture. Yep, Wendy, definitely. Muzha, reactive, trying to get out of reactive mode. Oh, Michael, or it might be Mike, you're in the right place if that's your goal, somewhere between reactive and planned. Yeah. Okay, definitely. Well, reliability-centered maintenance is definitely a process that can help you get out of a reactive mode. And one other thing I want to mention before we get into the details is learning about reliability-centered maintenance can be hugely advantageous, even if you never formally apply the process, because it's just jam-packed with the basics of maintenance and reliability principles. And one very important one that, in my experience, is still very largely either misunderstood or unknown. So we'll go over that today, but just learning about RCM and the principles can help you. So let's just quickly go over our agenda and, more importantly, the goals for today's session. My number one goal is for you to understand what SAE J1011 compliant reliability centered maintenance is. Now, will you put in the chat if you've ever heard of SAE J1011? If you see me looking this way, I'm just looking at the chat. So SAEJ 1011 is a short document. It's just 15 pages, but it is the internationally recognized standard on reliability-centered maintenance. This document does not teach you how to do reliability-centered maintenance, but rather it just sets forth what an RCM process must entail in order to be called reliability-centered maintenance. Now, this came out decades ago, but the reason why it was even established is because reliability-centered maintenance is very often so misunderstood. So I tell you this, number one, to be aware of the standard, but also to let you know that what I'm going to share with you today is compliant with the standard. So it's not my particular flavor, or I've not put my spin on RCM. I'm teaching you SAE 1011 compliant reliability centered maintenance. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over the basics of FMEA, or failure modes and effects analysis. Together, we're going to assess consequences, and I'm going to give you a little taste of the RCM decision diagram. And we're going to use that logic on 2 failure modes from our case study. And in one of them, we're going to actually establish a CBM, or a condition-based maintenance task. So this masterclass is not a comprehensive introduction to reliability-centered maintenance. It's just an overview on some key RCM concepts, but you will leave understanding what true reliability-centered maintenance is. I'm just looking at the chat. First, you've heard of the document. Okay, no, that's good. No apologies necessary. I'm delighted that you're here, and I'm delighted that I can share this. Tom says plenty of knee-jerk reactions around in this economy. Yeah, okay. So let's get into the principles. Now, before we start actually doing an RCM analysis, the first thing that we create is an operating context. So I like to think about an operating context is like a short story or a little storybook identification of the equipment that we're about to analyze. So it serves many purposes. It gets us all on the same page, make sure we understand what's going on with the equipment. And it sets us up for success. So, it can be several pages long. I want to go over I'm calling it an excerpt, but I want you to understand some of the operating context ideas when it comes to our case study. So we kind of set the scene for us, but just know that in the real world, our operating context would be much longer. Okay, I drive a 2014 Subaru Forester. It's a vehicle for my personal use. I drive it almost exclusively. So sometimes my husband might drive it, but generally it's just me. I drive around 12,000 miles per year in the southeastern United States, almost entirely in Alabama. The longest journey that I might take is about 4 hours from home. I do have a backup car. I have a 2004 Toyota Corolla. And the scope of our analysis today is going to be limited to those failure modes that would result in illumination of the low engine oil light and the low engine oil light system itself. Now, I'm using the word system because, of course, there's the light and then there's the associated circuitry, the whole thing. That's what I mean by using the word system. Now, in the real world, we would have a much larger scope of analysis, but of course, for purposes of today, the scope is very small. Okay, I have a 2.5 liter horizontally opposed 4-cylinder boxer engine with 170 horsepower. And in my car, the low engine oil light illuminates in the event that the engine oil decreases to the lower limit, which is a little more than 1 quart. Okay, so that kind of sets the scene for our case study as far as the operating context goes. So now let's jump into what reliability-centered maintenance is. So this is the definition that I like to use. It's a zero-based process that's used to identify the failure management strategies. Notice here, I don't say proactive maintenance tasks because it's more than just maintenance, but stay tuned on that. So failure management strategies that are required to ensure an asset meets its mission requirements and its operational environment in the most safe and cost-effective manner. So there's a lot rolled into that definition, and we'll go deeper into it as we go into more of the steps. I may refer back to it. But a couple of things I just want to mention is, we talk about mission requirements. So that could be military. It could be you have a dog food factory. It could be whatever your mission is. But it's also very important to make sure that we understand and make decisions regarding the operational environment. Where is this thing being used? In the desert? Is it being used in a very cold environment? And the other thing is, our decisions are always the most safe and cost-effective manner. So for example, if we have a failure mode that has operational consequences, and we think we want to do a proactive maintenance task, we would only assign that if it's cost effective. In other words, if it would cost less to do the task than to bear the consequences of letting it run to failure. So, and reliability-centered maintenance is a process that consists of 7 steps. So let's look at step 1. So step 1 is when we write functions. And something very special that my mentor, John Mowbray, taught us is that when it comes to reliability, reliability isn't a thing on its own, but rather reliability is sprinkled amongst all of the functions of a piece of equipment. So when we write functions properly, what we're actually doing is identifying the reliability that we need from our equipment. And this is one of the major strengths of reliability-centered maintenance, because the first thing you do is specifically identify what you need from your equipment. And then we use the rest of the 6 steps in the RCM process to figure out what we have to do to make sure we keep getting it. And so writing functions is a really important part of the process. When we write functions, we include primary and secondary functions. So now let's get to our case study and have a look at my 2014 Subaru Forester. So here I have a question for you, and you can type it in the chat or you can shout it out if you want to unmute yourself. But if I were to just ask you off the top of your head, just be quick, don't worry about, thinking, don't overthink it. What would you say the primary function of my 2014 Subaru Forester is? Just type it in the chat. Just the first thing that comes to your mind. Yes, Trent, transport you from point A to point B, to take you to A or B whenever I need to. Yes, to transfer you to places. Excellent. Yes, to get from point A to point B. Now, that is a general reaction when we write any primary function for anything. But when it comes to reliability-centered maintenance, we have to be more specific because, for example, to get from point A to point B, there's nothing that distinguishes that from my car, from an airplane, from a bicycle to a skateboard, etc. All of those things can get me from point A to point B. And this is an issue that would you put this in the chat for me? Hold on, let me read this real quickly. Drive for a certain period of time during the day, otherwise Shoab, I hope I'm saying that right. Those are good points. Will you put a yes in the chat if you've ever heard anything negative about reliability-centered maintenance, like it takes too long, it's too expensive, you don't get the results you want? Yep, okay, yes. I can promise, yes, too long and too expensive. Oh, yes. Okay, Maza, Lucas, not really spoken about. Okay, Wendy, thank you for that. We'll talk more about that too. Yes, Tom, the resource consuming monster. Okay, let me tell you this. Yes, reliability centered maintenance takes time and resources to do, no doubt about it. But I can tell you without a doubt, because I've been doing it for 26 years, when you do it correctly with the right people, the return that you can get is insane. It's like a magical process. But one of the mistakes that organizations often make is that right from the outset in America, we say pencil whip, like they pencil whip their functions and they'll just write like to get from point A to point B. And they don't get detailed enough. So the first step in the process kind of falls off the rails. Now, one of the really remarkable things about functions is when you write them in detail, detailing exactly what you need from your equipment. I've seen it in several analyses. Sometimes you figure out that you've been asking your machine to do more than it's capable of doing, and that's the cause of chronic failure. But because, we as humans, and rightfully so, we're thinking complex, right? Our minds, we're thinking about more complex stuff, and sometimes the stuff right in front of our eyes, we miss. And so that's oftentimes a cause of chronic failure. And so just writing functions with the team can really shed some light on what's going on with your equipment. Let me know in the chat if you've ever experienced that. Maybe just write function if you've, yes, e.g. Yeah. Oh, yes, Michael or Mike. Yep. When I do this live and I'll say like, raise your hand if you've ever had experienced chronic failure because you figured out you were asking your machine to do more than it could. I get several hands in the air. Okay. So this is definitely not detailed enough. So let's look at how to write a function properly. It includes a verb plus the word to plus a verb plus an object plus a performance standard and operating context when we need it. So let's take a look with me as the owner and operator of the asset. I'll share with you how I wrote my primary function. So what do I need to do? I need to transport. What do I need to transport? Up to 5 adult passengers and 3 medium-sized suitcases. And how well do I need it to do it? I needed to do it along paved roads and highways. I need to be able to drive up to 360 miles without stopping in climates that range from 0 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit while protecting passengers from the elements when I need it to do it. So this is an example of a primary function that identifies specifically what I need from the equipment, or in this case, from my car. Any questions or thoughts about functions, about how to write them, or does all this make sense? I'll just pause for like 5 seconds. And if there are no comments, I'll just move on. Okay. So now let's look at what this looks like on our FMEA. Because, a question I get often asked is, should I do FMEA or should I do reliability-centered maintenance? But when you do RCM, you actually complete an FMEA, and functions is the first step. So here you see our function on an FMEA, functions, functional failures, failure modes, and failure effects. Now, if we were doing a full-blown RCM analysis on my 2014 Subaru Forester, we would also start listing some secondary functions. So now let's pause and talk about evident versus hidden functions and what's the difference between the two. So in the context of reliability-centered maintenance, an evident function means that loss of that function would become evident to the operating crew under normal conditions. So, for example, let's say if the starter motor in your car failed, under normal circumstances, would you know it? Without any inspection, would you know if your starter motor in your car failed? Yes. Thank you. Thank you guys for that. Yes, we would know. And how would we know it? Well, when we go to start the car, because it would be normal for me to have to go to work or to have to go to the supermarket. I'd get in the car and my car wouldn't start. So it becomes evident to me. So therefore, our primary function for the 2014 Subaru Forester is evident, right? So if I can't transport at all, that is going to become evident to me. So that's pretty straightforward. But now in the context of reliability-centered maintenance, let's take a look at what a hidden function is. A hidden function means that failure of the function is not evident to the operating crew under
I just
normal
got the call from
conditions.
Dave, and it's becoming a mess. I don't know, because Dave told me yesterday that it's already arranged.
Okay, I think someone needs to be muted. I just paused because I thought that might have been a question. Okay. So hidden function means that failure of the function is not evident to the operating crew under normal conditions. And hidden functions almost always apply to protective devices. A protective device is a device or a system that is intended to protect us in the event that another failure occurs. Now let's look at a very basic example, and that is like a home smoke detector, a smoke detector that you might find in your kitchen, in your bedroom. So when we write functions for protective devices, we write them a little bit differently. We use the terms to be capable of in the event that something else happens. So in the case of our smoke detector, it is to be capable of sounding an audible alarm in the event that there is a fire in the room. So in the context of reliability-centered maintenance, it is a protective device. Again, it's to save us in the event that something else happens. So it's called a hidden function because failure of the function is not evident during normal situations. So right now in this room, if the smoke detector was in a failed state, would I know it? No. Thank you, Mazad. No, I wouldn't know it because under normal conditions, there's no fire. So it could be in a failed state and I wouldn't know it. So that's the normal condition, that there's no fire. Now, if the smoke detector is in a failed state and I don't know it, that's what makes it hidden, that it would be in a failed state and I wouldn't know it. But if there is a fire in the room and the smoke detector is in a failed state, that in the context of reliability-centered maintenance is called a multiple failure. Any questions or thoughts about that? I want to make sure everyone understands what a multiple failure is. So like another example is just as simple as an e-stop, an emergency stop button on a machine, right? You only need to push the e-stop in the event that something else happens. Maybe there's an emergency and you need to very quickly shut down the machine. But if everything's going fine and there's no emergency, then you would never need to push the e-stop. So you would only know, without inspection, you would only know it in the event that something else happened. So everyone good with that? Just give me a yes if you're good with that. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating. Okay, so in our case study, my low engine oil light, and from now on, when I say the low engine oil light, I'm including the physical light and all of the associated circuitry, right? There's like a whole line of things, something that detects and then sends a signal and lights the light in on the dashboard. So my low engine oil light is a protective device because under normal situations, the oil in the reservoir would not be low. So let's write the function for the low engine oil light. And keep in mind, we're going to use to be capable of, in the event that. So to be capable of visually alerting the driver in the event that the engine oil level decreases to the low level limit. So that's the function of my protective device, my low engine oil light. Now, let me ask you this. What is the multiple failure? Put it in the chat. So remember what we just went over with the smoke detector. The multiple failure would be a fire in the room and the smoke detector is in a failed state. What is the multiple failure for my low engine oil light? Knowing that the light is on and doing nothing about it. Okay, that's definitely an issue, Mazar. But what is the multiple failure? The light is not working, yes. So there's a failure within the circuit somewhere. Yes, Matt, thank you. And loss of engine oil. We have a low engine oil and the alarm doesn't work. That's exactly right. Excellent, guys, thank you. Light off and car down. Yes, that's my multiple failure. The oil in the reservoir falls to the low level limit and the low engine oil light system is failed. Excellent. So now let's look at this on our FMEA. So here is the function of our low oil level light, and you can see on an FMEA functions get designated with a number. So, and this would be considered a secondary function in the context of reliability centered maintenance. So there you have it. There you see it on our FMEA. Okay, so is the function of my low oil level light, my low engine oil light, is it evident or hidden in the context of RCM with what we just went through? Is it evident or hidden? The low engine oil light itself, the circuit, is it evident or hidden? Yes, we have a mix of answers. Yes, Gerard, Nick, Ruin, it's hidden. That's right. It's hidden because normally, under normal circumstances, my engine oil level is normal. So I don't need the light. So if it's in a failed state, it's hidden to me. Any questions or thoughts about that? We'll do a little more work with that, but I just want to clear up if there are any big issues at the moment. Okay. So it's indeed hidden. Okay, so let's move on to step 2 in the RCM process, and that is functional failures. As a practitioner of reliability-centered maintenance, functional failures, I would say is probably the easiest step. So we're going to go over this really quickly. When we write functional failures, we write functional failures for each function that we list, and we list total failure and partial failure. So in the example of our primary function for my 2014 Subaru Forester, what would total failure be? If you can just imagine, what would total failure be of my car? Completely unable to what? Yes, it stops running, completely unable to operate. Okay, you guys, some of you guys are giving me failure modes, so you're thinking ahead. Yes, it's failure, cannot transport at all. Yes, that is exactly it. Completely unable to transport. And in the case of our low engine oil light, what would total failure be? Completely unable to do what? Or incapable of doing what?
Would it just be incapable of alerting you to the issue?
Yes, that's exactly it. Who said that?
Me,
Tom.
Tom.
That was you. Yay, Tom. Yes.
I thought I'd just, I got sick of
Yes.
typing, so.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, thank you guys for participating so much in here. These are great answers. Okay. Incapable of visually alerting the driver in the event that the engine oil level decreases to the lower limit. Now, this circuit can fail another way. How else can it fail?
It can give you a false alarm or a
Yes,
false reading.
exactly. It can falsely illuminate, which is one of the things that was going through my mind, while I'm driving. That's probably the least likely, but, it was a possibility. Yes. Okay. So that was super quick on functional failures. Some of you are writing failure modes in the chat, which is excellent because that is our next stop. And it's my favorite part of RCM to talk about is failure modes. And it's such an important part of RCM. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that when I use the term failure mode, I mean the same thing as a failure cause. In our industry, people use all kinds of different terminology to mean different things or the same things. But for purposes of today, a failure mode is what specifically causes functional failure. So the term failure mode is synonymous with failure cause. And just for the record, SAEJ 1011 uses the term failure mode. So that's what I mean when I use the term failure mode, is what specifically causes functional failure. Now, something else my mentor, John Mowbray, taught us is that we manage assets at the failure mode level. And when you just stop and think about that for a second, that we manage physical assets at the failure mode level, whether we may realize it or not, that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we proactively and correctly identify and write our failure modes. So once we have specifically written what would cause our functional failures, then we can use the last 4 steps in the RCM process to figure out what we should do to manage it, if anything at all. So let's talk about the way I like to describe a failure mode is, and again, I'm like, when it comes to teaching and understanding for my own self, I need to understand things at a very basic level, because once I get it, then I can go more complex. So this is as basic as I can describe a failure mode. So a failure mode is like a road. So I live in the southeastern United States. Florida is south of Alabama. So if I want to drive, I can drive from Alabama to Florida. And if I do, I need to drive south. If I start driving and I'm going north, I'm never going to get there. It's the same thing for our physical assets when we identify our failure modes. We need to make sure that we're on the right road, because the road that we're on, our failure mode, is going to lead us to our desired destination, which is the appropriate failure management strategy, whether that's proactive maintenance or some other default strategies. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's pause here for a second. Reliability-centered maintenance, like I mentioned when we first started, is way more than just creating proactive maintenance tasks for your equipment. That is one of the major products, but it can do so much more. Remember how, another thing that my mentor, John Mowbray, taught us is that failure modes are the currency of physical assets. So here you see, I have American dollars, I have British pounds, I have euros, I've got Norwegian kronas, I've got Australian dollars, woohoo, I can use this next week. I've got Bahraini dinars, so I could keep going on and on with the currency. But the point I want to make is that failure modes are the currency of physical assets. And there's lots of different currency out there in the world. And the same thing goes for our assets. Because we, as physical asset managers, we're responsible for the reliability of our equipment. So when we do the right maintenance at the right time, that helps to get the reliability that we need. But there are a lot of other influences on our equipment. What about things like operating procedures? How about the quality of our technical publications? How about how badly or how well we train our people? The physical design of the equipment. What about supply issues? Troubleshooting procedures, failure finding tasks, which we'll talk about a little more in a little while. But would you put in the chat if you've ever had failure of a piece of equipment because it wasn't operated properly, or because maybe when it came right down to it, a technician or a person wasn't trained properly enough? Will you put that in the chat if you've ever experienced anything like that? A failure that had nothing to do with maintenance, like hardcore maintenance. Lucas says certainly. Peter D, yes, common. Ezekiel, yes. Human error. Oh, Ezekiel, you just gave me a good segue. Thank you for that. Yes. So there's a whole bunch more. So when we do RCM, we don't do a full-blown analysis on operating procedures, and we don't analyze the tech pubs. But when you do RCM with the right people, I advocate a facilitated working group approach to RCM. That means you've got a facilitator, someone who is very well-versed in the principles of reliability-centered maintenance. That person leads a team of equipment experts, for example, operator, maintainer, maybe a rep from manufacturer, maybe you need a maintenance planner. Who or what disciplines you have in your team vary depending upon the equipment that you're analyzing, but generally it's like an operator, maintainer, engineer, etc. So when you have all of these people assembled, they all have different perspectives and they all understand the equipment differently. So the operator is able to say, you know what, there's an operating procedure that's wrong, or an operating procedure that's not detailed enough. Maybe they know that there's part of a training program that could be beefed up. So when you do RCM correctly with the right people, these failure modes just naturally come to light. It's amazing. Now, I want to pause for a second and I want to talk about human error, because too often in our industry, we use the term human error, which is fine, but will you put it in the chat if you've ever seen in our industry that a person gets blamed when it really wasn't the person's fault? It was like, we didn't set the person up for success. Will you put that in the chat? Peter, thank you. Lucas, yes. Mohammed. I mean, Mazah's seen it multiple times, Ruin. I mean, more often than not, it's because I'll say we, and when I say we, I mean whoever is responsible for an asset. I mean, someone didn't do something right, or someone didn't set the right person up for success. So I want to show you this. I have two cats, and my orange cat Mako has asthma. So he gets albuterol. And when he was diagnosed with albuterol, the veterinarian prescribed, and see if you can see that, 0.2 milliliters of albuterol, and 2 or 3 times a day. So when I picked up the prescription, they gave me the bottle of albuterol and they gave me this syringe. So remember, the prescription was for 0.2 milliliters, so 0.2 of a milliliter. They gave me this syringe. Now, I want to block my face so it'll focus. This syringe is a 10 milliliter syringe. So the person behind the counter either didn't know, wasn't trained properly to give me the right syringe, or maybe was busy. You know, the pharmacy, I don't know what it's like where you are, but in the United States, the pharmacy is always bananas. There's always a line and it's very busy. So they gave me this syringe, but they should have given me this one, which is a 1 milliliter syringe. So for Mako, I need to give him this much, 0.2 milliliters. Now, 0.2 on this one, I'm just blocking my face. That's why I'm putting my hand here. 0.2 milliliters is like right here. Now, if I wasn't technically minded and paying attention, and even if I am technically minded, what about if I'm overtired and I'm busy and I'm not paying attention? What happens if I give my Mako 2 milliliters? I could stop his breathing. So this is an example where when I say a facilitated working group approach to RCM is really advantageous because you have all of the people in the room that understand the equipment from different perspectives. So an operator, for example, would know that this kind of a thing exists. You know, it's called a latent failure. In other words, it's an accident waiting to happen. So let's get back to failure modes. Keeping that in mind, here's how we properly write failure modes. I just want to look in the chat real quickly. Mazar has seen multiple times, very common. Oh, Ezekiel, yes, blame the manuals and the training. Yeah, okay, upside down, smiley face. All right. See, we have so much work to do. This is such an exciting industry that we're in. Okay, how do we write a failure mode? A noun plus a verb, and then as necessary, operating context. Let's look at a few quick examples. Intercooler tubes corrode. Brake pads wear. Compressor disc fatigues. Alternator belt deteriorates. Power turbine blade fatigues. So with one underline, you see that's the noun. And with two underlines, that's the verb. Now we can add some operating context to this and just say due to normal use for all of them. That's pretty simplistic. But let's dive a little deeper. Okay, hydraulic line chafes, hydraulic line chafes. They both look like they're the same failure mode, but are they? Because if I were facilitating, I would ask the question, what specifically causes the hydraulic line to chafe? It could be due to normal equipment vibration or due to improper routing. An oil filter can clog just due to normal use or because of gearbox break-in. Foreign object can enter the aircraft engine air inlet during flight, or it can accumulate while it's on the ground with the engine off. Now, remember how we talked about our failure mode is like a road. Let's take a look at that and to show you what I mean when I say it's like a road that leads us to our failure management strategy. So let's look at hydraulic line chafes due to normal equipment vibration. See, the solution or the failure management strategy for that could be maybe I need to inspect my line every 25 hours and replace it as required. If it's improper routing, I probably want to augment training. So you see, without the operating context part of it, it's not written specifically enough to get me where I need to go. The same thing with the oil filter. Clogs due to normal use, maybe I want to change it on a scheduled basis every 500 hours of operation. Due to gearbox break-in, maybe I only need to change it after the first 50 hours of operation, and then that takes care of that failure mode. For foreign object in the engine air inlet during flight, well, there's nothing I can do to predict or prevent that. But remember we talked about default strategies, which means anything other than proactive maintenance. I mean, that is a plausible failure mode. We hear about that often in the news, right? So there's no way to predict or prevent it, but we can formulate an emergency procedure for an in-flight engine failure that reduces the consequences of failure to a tolerable level for us. For it accumulating on the ground, well, we can inspect the engine inlet for foreign objects prior to engine start. So you can see that the solutions, there are different solutions for these failure modes. In this case, it's proactive maintenance, but in the case of the improper routing, you can see here that is a default strategy or an update to a training program. So you can see how reliability-centered maintenance is more than just maintenance. Okay, any questions or thoughts? We good? I'll just pause for 5 seconds just to make sure. I'll take a sip of water. Okay. So now if we get back to me being on the side of the road, you know, when my low engine oil light went on and I'm driving, I really did immediately go into RCM mode. And I was thinking to myself, okay, what specifically could cause this light to illuminate? And I identified 3 things. One is that, you know, it's a boxer engine, and the engine in my Forester does consume whatever verb you want to use. It does actually consume oil. So the oil level could be low due to normal consumption. And if that's the case, I probably have enough oil to make it all the way home without doing any damage to my engine. But I don't know that in the moment. Okay, the second thing it could be is I could have a leak in my oil system. That's worst case scenario, right? In worst case scenario, it's a pretty hefty leak where the reservoir could deplete quickly, and I could do some serious damage to my internal engine components. And the third one that I identified is that you guys in the chat identified it, is that the light could falsely illuminate. So there could be a problem in the circuit. So these are the 3 things that were going through my mind. I considered number 2, it's the worst case scenario. I certainly don't want to bear the consequences of that. So that's what I did. I mean, in real life, I pulled over. There was a gas station that was coming up rather quickly. I pulled over at the gas station, and with these 3 things in mind, the first thing I did is, and now mind you, I'm in a suit and heels and pantyhose, but anyway, I'm like looking under the car to make sure, looking to see if there's any evidence of big leaks. I don't see anything like that. So, I popped the hood, I checked the oil, and obviously I identified that my engine oil was just a little low. So I replenished the reservoir. But I was still in reactive mode on the side of, having to pull over on the highway. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to go to step 4 in the RCM process, and that is failure effects. So a failure effect is, think of it just like of a little story of what would happen if we did nothing to predict or prevent each failure mode. 2 important points about failure effects. Number 1, we always document the worst case scenario, the worst plausible worst case scenario. And here's the key to failure effects. If anyone ever were to ask you, why do we write a failure effect? Here's the number 1 reason, the primary reason, is we have to write it in enough detail so that we can assess the consequences of failure. Here's what a failure effect needs to include: a description of the failure process from the occurrence of the failure mode to the functional failure, physical evidence that the failure has occurred, how it adversely affects safety and/or the environment, how it affects operational capability or the mission, specific operating restrictions as a result of the failure, secondary damage, and what must be done and how long it takes to repair the failure. So let's look at a failure effect for one of our failure modes. And that is the failure mode that I experienced that I didn't proactively manage. And that is engine consumes oil due to normal use. And let's read that together. During engine operation, the oil is gradually consumed by the engine. The decrease in oil is indicated on the dipstick. If this goes unnoticed, AKA if the operator never looks at it. Eventually, the engine oil drops to the point that the low oil level light illuminates. The driver pulls over at the nearest service station and checks the oil. The dipstick indicates that the engine oil is low. The driver replenishes the oil and continues to the destination, but with some delay. Downtime to repair up to 30 minutes. So that's pretty much what I experienced. Any questions or thoughts on the failure effect before we move on? Okay, one thing I want to note is that the failure mode is recorded under total failure. You can see here in our FMEA where a failure mode is indicated by a number, so 1A1. I put it under the total failure because it imposes operating restrictions. In other words, it makes me pull over, so it makes me lose my primary function. Okay, let's look at our low engine oil light. And remember, we've already written this function to be capable of visually alerting the driver in the event that the engine oil level decreases to the lower limit. We've already written our functional failure, incapable of visually alerting the driver in the event that the engine oil level decreases to the lower limit. So what specifically could cause that functional failure? Well, my low oil level light circuit could fail open, right? Anywhere in the circuit. So once again, just noting our FMEA, our failure modes and effects analysis, our failure mode is designated by a number. Okay, now let's read this failure effect together. This failure mode only matters in the event that the engine oil level decreases to the lower limit. The driver is unaware of the low oil situation and continues to operate the vehicle. The oil level continues to drop. Engine components are not properly lubricated and start to wear abnormally. Eventually, engine oil pressure decreases and engine oil temperature increases. The oil pressure warning light and/or the check engine light illuminates on the dashboard. Driver must pull over and cannot get to the desired destination on time. It's likely that the driver can find a safe place to pull over and call a tow truck. However, worst case, the driver must pull over on a busy highway or a dark country road at night. The oil system is repaired as required. Any secondary engine damage is repaired as required. Worst case, engine must be replaced. Downtime to repair, 3 days to 1 month at a cost ranging from $1,000 to $8,000. So you can see in this failure effect how it details what happens if a failure mode occurs and the protective device is in a failed state also. So you can see how worse it is. Okay, any questions or thoughts about failure effects? The next step in the RCM process is failure consequences. And that is when we identify if a failure mode has safety, environmental, operational, or non-operational consequences. We identify one of the 4. It's relatively straightforward. In step 6 of the RCM process is when we start figuring out how we can manage each failure mode. And step 6 is when we identify proactive maintenance and intervals. Now, in the context of reliability-centered maintenance, proactive maintenance means a scheduled restoration, a scheduled replacement, or condition-based maintenance, or CBM. Now, in SAEJ 1011, condition-based maintenance is referred to as on-condition maintenance. I'm going to use the term CBM because we put in the chat which term you use. Like, do you normally say CBM for condition-based maintenance? Another term we hear in our industry is predictive maintenance, which is essentially the same thing, but generally predictive maintenance refers to more sophisticated monitoring, like with, what's the word I'm looking for? Like strain gauges. I can't think of the word I'm trying to use, but strain gauges are equipment that's put directly on equipment that's supposed to tell us that failure is in the process of occurring. Put in the chat if you use CBM or on condition maintenance. Sensors. Thank you, Ezekiel. Oh my gosh, I couldn't think of the word. Thank you. Yes, vibration analysis is a form of CBM. Okay. So when I use the term CBM, I'm talking about condition-based maintenance. So now, and again, this is a very quick introduction to the RCM decision diagram. So at first glance, it looks very busy, but after we answer 2 questions, we're only ever going to go down 1 column. When we do reliability-centered maintenance, I want you to think about reliability-centered maintenance as a funnel, okay? Or the RCM decision diagram is like a funnel. Every failure mode that we identify on our FMEA, we're going to put through the decision diagram. And we put it through the decision diagram, and what we're going to come out with is failure management strategies, which means proactive maintenance and or default strategies. So think about it like a funnel. Failure mode in, solution out. So when we do RCM, we answer the first question. Now, let's pretend we're doing starter motor fails in our car and put the answer in the chat. Without inspection, will the loss of function caused by this failure mode, in other words, starter motor fails, will that become evident during normal situations? Yes or no? Is it going to become evident to me as the driver under normal circumstances if it's failed? If my starter motor is failed? Yes, Peter. Yes, Scott, Lucas, Mazar, Mohammed, Wendy, Ruin, everyone. Thank you. Yes. So we go to the left on the decision diagram in that case. And the next thing we do is we assess the consequence of the failure mode. Now, in the case of my starter motor for my car, it would definitely not be safety. It wouldn't be environmental in my operating context. It would be operational. So I would answer, I would answer yes to the operational consequence question, and you can see the grayed out part that the rest of the decision diagram is eliminated, and I only go down this column. Now, generally speaking, on the RCM decision diagram, you see we've got condition-based maintenance that we consider scheduled restorations, and we consider scheduled replacements as far as maintenance is concerned. In the context of reliability-centered maintenance, if we are to assign a proactive maintenance task, it must be technically feasible and worth doing. Let's look at what that means, and let's actually analyze our failure mode. Engine consumes oil due to normal use. So what we're going to do together is we're going to identify if a CBM task for this failure mode is technically feasible. In other words, technically it makes sense to do it. And 2, is it worth it? So we have to do a little introduction for on-condition maintenance. Now, my slides say on-condition maintenance because that's what SAEJ 1011 calls it, but CBM or condition-based maintenance, it's the same thing. All right, an on-condition task or a CBM task is performed at a defined interval to detect a potential failure condition so that maintenance can be performed before the failure occurs. How can we identify a potential failure condition? With relatively simple techniques like measuring brake linings, employing more technically involved techniques like oil analysis, with continuous monitoring with sensors directly installed on machinery. And today we hear like industrial Internet of Things, and things are getting even more technically involved in our industry. Okay, so in the context of RCM, in order to assign a proactive maintenance task, we have to determine that it's technically feasible and worth doing. So with respect to a CBM task, let's start out with what makes it technically feasible. In order to determine if an on-condition task is technically appropriate, potential failure conditions must be evaluated. And so now I'm going to introduce you to the P2F curve. If you know all about the P2F curve, then what I want you to think about is who in your organization doesn't know about it, but needs to know about it. And if you've never heard of the P2F curve and the P2F interval, then know that you are not alone, because this is one of the most still sometimes unknown or misunderstood concepts in our industry. Okay, here's the P2F curve. The x-axis is time, and the y-axis is the resistance to failure. Let's assume we install a new component here. After a certain amount of time that goes by, most failure modes give us a warning that failure is in the process of occurring. In other words, it creates a potential failure condition, like vibration. And if we ignore it, say, forget about it, then failure occurs. The time between when a potential failure condition is detectable and failure occurs is called the P2F interval. Let's look at an example. Let's take a very simple example of a V-belt. And let's say I install a new V-belt today. We know that V-belt isn't going to last forever. And eventually it's going to it's going to be in the process of failing. And it's going to display a potential failure condition. For example, visual evidence of cuts and frays. And if we never look at it, eventually the belt is going to break. Now, the time between when there is visual evidence of cuts and frays and the time the belt breaks, that's called the P2F interval. So it's we as physical asset managers, or as an RCM team member, we have to identify someone. Can you check? Someone is not muted, so check yourself. I think it might be Trent. Trent, thank you. Okay. Let's say, for example purposes, that P2F interval is 6 months. Now, everyone stick with me. The general rule of thumb when it comes to CBM tasks as to how often you do them is to half the P2F interval and do the inspections that often. It's just a general rule of thumb. So in this case, how often would we do our CBM task? If my P2F interval is 6 months, put it in the chat. 3 months. Yes, thank you, Matt. Okay, so let's say, thank you, Mazar. Peter. So let's say, Peter, you go out today. You don't know it, but you're here on your P2F interval. So you go out there, you don't see any evidence of cuts and frays. The next time you come back is going to be 3 months later, right? So we're going to be roughly here on our curve. Now, at that point, you're going to see the evidence of where? 3 months later. So the time remaining you have to take action to do something about it, in other words, to manage the consequences of failure, is 3 months. In the context of reliability-centered maintenance, this is called the net P2F interval, but don't get wrapped up in the terminology. What I want you to know is that's the minimum amount of time that you have left to take action. Here's the point about condition-based maintenance. It doesn't matter how often failure occurs. What matters is how quickly failure occurs once a potential failure condition is detectable. I want to pause on that for a second and make sure, put in the chat if you have any questions. The key to CBM is how quickly failure occurs once a potential failure condition is detectable. So let me ask you a question. Let's assume that I have to take this asset offline in order to visually inspect the belt. If I only take the asset off once a year, or if I only take it offline once a year, can I monitor the belt at intervals less than the P2F interval? Yes or no? No, I cannot. So this P2F interval, this is of no use to me. But if in my second scenario, I take it offline every month, can I monitor it at intervals less than the P2F interval? Absolutely. Now, this is one of the great strengths of condition-based maintenance, is that once you're armed with this information and these details, it can help you to determine or to like extend shutdown schedules maybe. It can help you with spare parts. So if you know you have a 3 months left over, but it takes 6 months to get the part in, then you might maybe have to keep one on the shelf. So this is one of the most important elements of condition-based maintenance that is wildly unknown and misunderstood. Let's put it into practice together. Okay, but before that, 4 key points. Number 1, CBM task intervals are not based upon mean time between failure. CBM task intervals are not based on the useful life of a component. They are not based upon the criticality of failure. CBM task intervals are based on the P2F interval. In other words, how quickly failure occurs once the potential failure condition is detectable. Now, let me ask you a question. Let's say I go out every 3 months to check the belt, and I've gone out there for the last 1.5 years and I've not seen any wear on the belt. Does that mean I can extend my P2F interval? If I've gone out there for a year, every 3 months, I've gone out 4 times and I've not found cracks and frays, does that give me technical justification to extend my P2F interval? Excellent, Peter. No, it does not. Because that's this time span. I don't care about this when it comes to CBM. All I care about is how quickly failure occurs once the potential failure condition is detectable. So don't make that mistake. Okay, any questions or thoughts? Because now we're going to go back to our case study. Okay, Matt says, would it depend on the impact of failure? So Matt, the straight answer is no. The P2F interval is, the CBM task intervals are based on the P2F interval. So let's say we determine it's 6 months and we're going to do our task every 3 months. Let's say that failure mode has very severe consequences. Someone could be injured or killed. You may want to do the inspection every month to make sure you don't miss it. That's where consequences would come in. But consequences on their own do not dictate it. I mean, you could have a really severe failure mode that could kill someone. So you say, you know what, we better look once a week. Well, what if the P2F interval is only 3 days? So you cannot rely on that solely. Okay, you ready for this? Let's go back to our failure mode. Engine consumes oil due to normal use. We've already read our failure effect, right? It means I have to pull over on the side of the road, check the oil, and replenish the reservoir. We've already so engine consumes oil due to normal use. Without inspection, will loss of function caused by that failure mode become evident to us during normal conditions? Yes or no? And you can refer to the failure effect if you're not sure. Yes, it will, right? My light's going to come on. I'm going to know it. Me as the owner and operator of the vehicle, thank you, Peter. Yes, oil light low on. I say for me, that has operational consequences. So that leaves me going down this column in the RCM decision diagram. And the first thing I'm going to do is consider condition-based maintenance. So let's get to it. So let's say here my oil is replaced. So the volume of oil is where it needs to be. Remember the P2F interval, potential failure condition, failure, and the P2F interval. Okay, so I just gave you the answer. Sorry. Hopefully you didn't see it. Okay, what would a potential failure condition be for my engine oil being low due to normal consumption? What warning, if I were to inspect, now you can inspect. So if I were to look, what could I check to see if my oil is low? Mazar, we didn't determine the potential failure condition yet. That's what we're looking at now. So what warning, what could I inspect to tell me my engine oil is in the process of being consumed? Okay, Scott, distance traveled, possibly. The dip, yes. So yes, Scott, that is a definite possibility. In a real world, there's usually more than one potential failure condition. But we would check the best one, the dipstick, exactly, right? So here's my dipstick. Here's full, here's low. So now I have to determine what would a potential failure condition be? What would be the warning for me that I'm getting to the point, I certainly don't want to get past here. For me, I would say like 75%, right? I would want to become aware if my oil were here. Is everybody with me on that? Give me a yes if you have a question, let me know. Okay, you got it. Okay. So now we have to answer, what is failure? Now, failure doesn't necessarily mean functional failure where you're out of oil and you hurt your engine. So what could we consider failure to be if we're looking at our dipstick? How about it drops to the low level, right? Because me as the driver, I don't want to get below the low level, right? So now the question is, what is the P2F interval? How long does it take me to go from 75% full to the low level? Okay, so yes, and thank you, Peter. You said the low level is reached. Let's refer to the Subaru manual. This is what my Subaru Forester manual says. It says that here is number 1 is full level, number 2 is low level. And number 3, what they're saying is that the volume here is the equivalent of 1.1 US quart. Now, my Subaru manual states that consuming more than 1 quart per 1,200 miles is abnormal. So what they're basically saying is the worst case scenario, you can drive 1,200, the worst case scenario is in 1,200 miles, you will reach this low level. And they recommend checking the engine oil level at each fuel stop. So if I break that 1,200 miles down on my dipstick, right? If I break it up into fourths, 3, 6, 9, 12. Is everybody with me on this? Where Subaru manual is saying worst case scenario, the minimum amount you have is 1,200 miles to go from full to low. Everyone's with me? Okay, good. All right. So given this, if my potential failure condition is I'm 1/4 past the full level, and I've defined failure as oil drops to the low level, what's my P2F interval? Put it in the chat. To go from here to here. What's my P2F interval? Yes, Matt, it's 900 miles. Exactly. Okay, so now 900 miles. Good. Okay, so now I'm going to give you another taste of the decision diagram. These are the answers. These are the questions that we have to answer on the RCM decision diagram in order to determine if a CBM task is technically feasible, which are all these questions, and then in italics, if it's cost effective. Okay. If inspected, is it possible to detect evidence of impending failure? Yes, we've already said. What is it? We can check the dipstick. What is the P2F interval? We've just determined it, 900 miles. Is it reasonably consistent? In my operating environment, yes. Is it practical to monitor the item at intervals less than the P2F interval? Well, we're going to have to figure that one out. Tom, there are a lot of assumptions here, but in any engineering discipline, we definitely have to make assumptions. Okay. How far can, now, Subaru says to check the oil at each fuel stop. How far can I go on one tank of fuel? My car holds 16 gallons of fuel. I can drive about 30 miles per gallon. So I can drive about 480 miles on one tank of gas. So if I check the oil every time I stop for gas, that would be about every 400 miles. Is that practical for me? Yes, it's practical for me. Oh, sorry. So now I have it, and is it long enough to manage the consequences of failure? Sure it is, because if I check the dipstick and I see I'm low, even if I don't have oil with me, I know that I still have another 400 or so miles to go before I get to the low level. So that's plenty of time for me to get a quart of oil and replenish my reservoir. So answering yes to all this, we've just determined that it's technically feasible. Now, is it worth doing? Is it cost effective? Well, we certainly don't need a cost analysis to know that it would be worth it economically to check the oil than to not check it and possibly be left on the side of the road, for me anyway. So I answer yes to that. When we answer yes to all of the questions in the box, then that means we can assign the task. At every fuel stop, check the engine oil level using the dipstick, replenish the reservoir as required. This is basically, this is the almost, we're basically at the end. This is the big crux of what I want you to walk away with. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts, and at least if it's eye-opening or if it makes sense, can you let me know in the chat? Or any questions also, just let me know. Is there anything confusing about Peter? Perfect sense? Okay. Thank you, Matt. It's been a great way to practically apply this process. And that was my goal. Because if you can understand this, you can apply it to more complex stuff. And of course, there's a little more to say about the P2F interval, but this is just a 90-minute masterclass. With the age, consumption would be different, and that can be recorded as well. And it is, Mohammed. The older my car gets, the quicker it is. That's a whole, yes, it's an excellent point. Easy to learn. Got it. Good. Okay, great. And that's also a glimpse at the RCM decision diagram. So this will just take us a minute to go over. I want to very quickly look at default strategies, which is a solution other than proactive maintenance. Remember, we talked about this. And one can be a failure finding task. A failure finding task would be like blowing smoke at the smoke detector and checking our protective devices. Remember, we talked about here. We're back at our low engine oil light. And we said that the circuit fails open. If we go, we've already read our failure effect. It only matters in the event that the engine oil level decreases below the lower limit. We don't know it, we're driving, we do damage to our engine. So if we go to our decision diagram and I ask you the question, if everything's normal and my low oil level light circuit fails open, will I know it? Will it become evident to me under normal situations? Yes or no? It will not, right? Because assuming the level in my reservoir, there's yeses and nos. So let's just pause for a second. So what we're saying is, without inspection, will I know it if my low oil level light is failed, the circuit's failed open, but I have the proper amount of oil in my reservoir? I'm not going to know it, right? Okay, good, Mohammed. It's no. So now I'm hidden. For me, it has operational consequences. It's not going to hurt me, but it's going to cost me. And obviously, there's no CBM or preventive maintenance I can do on my circuit, but there is possibly a default strategy. And that is, maybe I can do a failure finding task on it. Maybe there's something else I can do that's outside the scope of what we're talking about today. But I just want to make you aware that just because maintenance isn't the answer, there could be another answer. Okay, so this, just to sum it all up, when we do reliability-centered maintenance, we create an FMEA with the first 4 steps. When you include step 5, you actually create a FMECA. And like I mentioned, it's really important to do a facilitated working group approach to RCM so you can get all those perspectives baked into your analysis. Now, my mentor, John Mowbray, taught me that time is our most valuable asset, and you chose to spend your time with me today, and for that, I am sincerely grateful. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, I'd be delighted by a connection request. And if you're in a subscribing kind of a mood, I'd love for you to check out my YouTube channel and subscribe. And if you have any questions, I know we're just about out of time. We started a few minutes late, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions, folks? Please shout.
One thing Matt put in the chat, fail safe in design, and you're right, Matt. In technically advanced systems, a lot of protective devices are fail safe. In other words, there's like monitoring, they're monitoring the protective devices. So that could be. In my case, there isn't. Oh, you're so welcome, everyone. Could you let me know, was either put a yes in the chat if the P2F interval was an eye-opener for you or would be an eye-opener for someone within your organization? You're so welcome, Matt. You're welcome, Ezekiel. Ezekiel, it was? Oh, great. Thank you. You're welcome, Nick. Thank you, everyone. It was a sincere pleasure. And thank you so much for participating. That was really good. This was actually almost like a live thing. We had a lot of participation.
It really was. It really was, folks. Nancy, that was amazing. Thank you so much for your energy. You're bang on time, and you've gone through 90 minutes. We were talking about 90 minutes at the beginning. Folks, yep. As we mentioned earlier, that if you are able to next week, come and spend 2 days with Nancy. She's going to be with us the evening, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th in Melbourne. If you want to come along, we're at record numbers, actually. Record numbers of people are going to be with us next week in Melbourne. So if you still can come, please see if you can come even for a day. Even if you can get there for a day, we'll be able to get you a ticket. So please do that. And also in this chat, you will have seen our mainstream community page, Nancy's session that she's put together there, as well as some other stuff that we are working with her on, will be all available on our network. It's free to attend, free to join. There is heaps of other stuff on there, including all of the past masterclasses that we've had, all of the white papers, reports from all of the kind of illustrious speakers like Nancy around the world that we work with, and in Australia and in New Zealand. So if you haven't already joined, please do join that. Yeah, if there is any other questions at all you have, please speak now or forever hold your peace. Otherwise, we will be back in touch with you very, very soon for our next class, which is in 4 weeks' time. But yeah, hopefully we'll see you next week in Melbourne. And if you have any questions at all about that, please just give us a shout. Nancy, thank you so much. I know it's late in your day. You've been brilliant, so really appreciate it, and thank you ever so much for joining us, everyone, folks. Have a great day.
Thank you, my pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, folks.
Thank
And
you.
Akraf, thank you for coming